afternoon, everyone, and thank you to Anna and to AUI Bar, UNEP, all the wonderful partners for convening this excellent conference yet again. It's really incredible that it's been going for 9 whole editions now. So personally, as ESR, we're always pleased to speak at this really special forum. We feel that aquatic animals often tend to get left out of the animal welfare debate, so it's always a pleasure to come and share with other attendees of the conference the latest in our part of the animal welfare world. So previous attendees at the conference will remember my talk in the last couple of years. They were slightly more high level, so what I want to do this year is go one step further and focus on our progress in actually rolling out technological solutions. So today I'll be giving the latest updates on our progress in improving the welfare of farmed fish in African aquaculture generally, but specifically focusing on Egypt and Kenya, because that's where we've really owned in the last year or so. And just as a reminder for those who are not familiar with the sector, when we talk about aquaculture in most of Africa, although there's a number of key species that are being farmed, really what we're talking about is tilapia primarily. So when I say fish welfare, I'm really talking about tilapia welfare predominantly in the context of our projects. So I guess I don't need to introduce the concept of one welfare to this audience specifically, but what I'll do is give a brief overview of what that concept looks like in the case of fish farming. So if we apply it to fish welfare or fish farming, what one welfare means is that improving fish welfare has benefits not just to the fish, of course, but to the livelihoods of the farmers. It improves consumer well-being, and it can also contribute to food security and supporting the ecosystems that allow production to occur. And as we've heard several times, both at the African Animal Welfare Conference and in similar fora, in regions like Africa, you really have to tie in concepts like animal welfare to, issues of food security, farmer livelihood, which is an approach that we're finding that we naturally take anyway in our advocacy work. So maybe we don't call it one welfare, but we naturally do that anyway. And the reason that's important is because using a farmer-led approach is really the only one available to us. Consumer-led approaches, which is more common in the global north, require market drivers where we don't really have in the global south. Consumers can't put the same kind of pressures on producers to adopt higher welfare practices. And just specifically to tilapia is considered poor man's fish, or one of the cheapest sources of protein in Africa. So we really don't have the same drivers. And just as a reminder on the current state of aquaculture in Africa, it's widely known that aquaculture is the fastest growing food sector globally. But what many people don't actually realize is that the African aquaculture sector is the world's fastest growing one. And that's part of the reason why it's important to think about animal welfare at this juncture. So, and of course, within Africa, Egypt is by far the largest producer, which is what this figure here is showing. And that's, not just because I'm from there, but also because it's such a big player that we at ESR focus a big proportion of our research and farmer outreach work there. Egypt is something like 70% of total production in the continent, and that rivals some of the top producers in Asia. The usual suspects like China, Indonesia, Vietnam, India, so on. And in terms of tilapia, we are the third largest. And as I said, from ESR's perspective, the interesting thing about African aquaculture is that the sector is still fairly new, and there's more extensive farming and semi-intensive production methods as opposed to the intensive ones we're seeing in other parts of the world. So that gives us a window in which to introduce good practices like animal welfare, which increases the likelihood that they're going to stick. So where does ESR come into this? I think previous attendees will already be familiar with our work since I've presented similar things in the past. But for those who don't know, Ethical Seafood Research, or ESR, we were founded in 2022 with the mission to fill in the gap, given that there was hardly anyone working on improving aquatic animal welfare in Africa. I say aquatic animals to include shrimp and other groups, but really fish are the predominant ones, and hardly anyone was doing anything on fish. We're a non-profit. We have an office in Egypt, Kenya, Spain, and the UK, primary registration. And our main focus is on both, of course, research, which is in the name, but it's very much applied research. So, why is fish welfare? Where are the issues with fish welfare? What can we do about it? And a kind of iterative process where we learn from what we've tried out as interventions. We do also do a lot of training and educational work and even some policy work. So I've put an example there of the Zanzibar aquaculture strategy, which I would have mentioned in the past, but now has finally been adopted by the minister. So what we've managed to do in the case of Zanzibar is get the government to adopt some high welfare as strategies, practices within their strategy. So for the rest of the presentation, I'll focus on our joint work in bringing the Tilapia Welfare App to the Egyptian and Kenyan aquaculture sectors. As I talked about at last year's conference, we partnered with FAI Farms. They're a UK-based consultancy in the food systems space that one of the things they did is develop an app for monitoring tilapia welfare. It provides an easy, straightforward way for farmers to assess the welfare of their fish. All they have to do is just take some basic measurements on the farm, enter them into the app, and the app gives the farmer a welfare score, and also provides recommendations for how to improve the practices from both a fish and farmer perspective. So far, we've had good success with the rollout of this app. We've trained a few hundred advisors in the use of the app. We've used a training of trainers approach to do that, so that's allowed us to train even more people. And for our pilot last year, we actually conducted over 4,000 assessments at 1,000 farms, which is, something like 15% of the entire tilapia sector in Egypt. And remember, it's one of the world's largest, so that was quite an achievement. And this year we've continued with that approach, so we've been training more advisors and trying to get the app into the hands of more people. So last year, we probably reached around 260 million fish. Like we say, we improved, or at least we assessed the welfare and made some improvements, but this year maybe it's the smaller number because we've been trying a different approach. And just the other thing I wanted to say about the approach here is that of course the Tilapia Welfare App automatically brings in the One Welfare approach. So what it does is it's linking fish welfare, it's linking farmer productivity, and looks at the impacts of operations and environment, which is very much the One Welfare approach. And just as a reminder, the welfare assessments in the app cover a range of indicators from the 4 domains. So that's health, that's behavior, environment, nutrition. The app then allows users to score each indicator and generates an overall welfare score. In the 2024 production cycle, our team of vets and aquaculture technicians, what they would do is visit the farms they were assigned to. They'd use the app to conduct welfare assessments. And then each visit, the team would explain to the farmer how to enter the information into the app, and then how to interpret the welfare score and the recommendation that the app provides at the end of the assessment. Farmers would receive immediate feedback, and then with the repeated visits, they could start to visualize trends over time. That's really important, so not just for learning, but also for building trust and a rapport with the farmers. So for farmers to see the value in using the tool, we really had to, build that rapport over time. Using the app as a one-off is not particularly informative. The real value is in using the app over time. And I just want to emphasize here that we were never telling farmers what to do or how to manage their farms. All we were doing is showing them what was happening on their own farms using the app and the metrics there, and letting them come to a decision about what makes the most sense for them to do in order to improve their practices. Just to give an example of what the trends from the repeated visits look like, so these 2 screenshots on the left are taken from 2 of the farms that were really engaged in our project. So these 2 farms were visited repeatedly during the autumn of last year, which should be shortly before they were about to harvest. And right next to where I've put the green arrow, you can see the improvement in the welfare score from moderate to good, which is obviously quite encouraging to see because, underneath that, beneath that, let's say, there's an improvement in a change in practices. So that's not just a score that's changing. It means there's some practice that's changed that's led to that, and that's what's reflected in the higher welfare score. And in one of these cases, the improvement in welfare score was due to positive changes to feeding practices, and the other, it was due to an improvement in water quality parameters after certain changes that were made by the farmer. I'll give a global overview overview in the next slide, and then I'll just give a couple of case studies where farmers implemented changes that improved welfare. So the rollout of this app across 1,000 farms revealed consistent patterns of low welfare practices, particularly in water quality management, and also in underfeeding and very little early disease detection. These are the main areas that we thought were pressing. These are all practices that are associated with economic and environmental performance, so the link to One Welfare is clear. But through repeated farm visits and through individual feedback, we saw that there was a trend of clear improvements and positive changes over time. And that's what that green line in the middle there shows. So there was an improvement in welfare score from 47% to 67% over the duration of our project. And the biggest changes that we saw, as I mentioned, were things like farmer awareness. There was things that farmers were not aware of, such as behavioral indicators. There was also changes in feeding practices and in water quality monitoring. But before I go into more individual examples, I just want to share some of the findings related to the environment domain in particular, since they help frame the examples that I'm going to give. One thing we noted from our study last year is that water quality can fluctuate quite quickly in the fish ponds. That's especially true during the peak season when it gets hot. Now, if there's no frequent monitoring, that can be an issue. And that was one of the main takeaways from last year's project. And that's why this year we're running a very specific case study with FAI about the importance of routine water testing. I won't have time to go into that, but one of the things we saw last year was that many farms had poor dissolved oxygen levels, high ammonia concentrations, and fluctuating temperatures. Well, most of the farms that participated in our study, they didn't have access to water quality testing tools, and they were just relying on visual indicators or anecdotal knowledge to know about their water quality. And almost all the water quality assessments that went into the study were performed by our team using our equipment. And not just did farmers not have equipment, those that did were not very confident using the kits. In the farms that received repeated feedback, repeated training and tailored feedback, we did see improvements in water quality. But then there was other variables such as pH that were harder to change. But in general, we found that, given that environmental conditions were not great, stock densities could probably have been, it was probably better to lower stock densities. So that's something that we're working with some of the farmers on for the next cycle. In this example, the farm was recently filled with water from the underground well that supplied the farm. At first, the dissolved oxygen level was very low. Nitrite was high at 0.5 milligrams per liter. That's not good. And that's why the welfare score on the 23rd of May, there the bottom was 48%. And to address this issue, what the farmer did was they closely monitored water quality as a routine practice using the kit we provided him, and they entered the parameters into the Tilapia Welfare App, allowed the app to guide the decisions about how to manage his farm. He then decided to pump water into his pond from another source, which led to a rise in dissolved oxygen levels, and then nitrite levels dropped to a much more less dangerous level, and that's what was reflected in the improved welfare score of 52% at the second assessment, and was even lower in the third assessment in the following week. So that's why the environment score went from 54% to led to an overall welfare score of 55%. So that's a good example of how careful water quality management supported by the Tilapia Welfare App can make a significant and positive difference in the health and welfare from tilapia. And I just added a slide here because behavioral indicators were among the least familiar to farmers, and actually is one of the areas where we saw the most promising improvement. So at the outset of our project, erratic or surface skimming, like the type of swimming is called surface skimming, was often ignored or misinterpreted, but that can actually be a sign of issues that are yet to come. So also looking at how fish respond to feed was something that farmers were not used to monitoring. So through repeated assessments and through repeated visits, we were able to improve the farmer's capacity to identify abnormal behavior. And we did see that feeding issues were improved over time. So we do see an opportunity to bring in more behavioral-based welfare and training. So that could be something supported by videos or visual references, and that can help empower farmers to detect welfare issues and intervene before the clinical signs emerge, which by then it might be too late. Now in Kenya, we've been trying a slightly different approach, given that there's these extension officers that belong to the government ministries, and they already have ones for fisheries, and they actually have to visit farms regularly. So we decided to see if we could train the extension officers in the use of the Tilapia Welfare App and get them to carry out assessments. It's something that they would need to be doing anyway as part of the work to prove to their superiors that they're visiting farms. And so far that approach has worked quite well. We trained 30 of the most active officers earlier this year in the counties surrounding Lake Victoria, and we also trained the county directors. It's still early days, but like I said, so far we're seeing good results. And that's the figure from a dashboard that comes with the app. It's just showing that the welfare scores at the assessed farms have improved over time. They tended to be a bit higher than Egypt, but it's only been a few months, so that's exactly what we want to see, really, the improvement in the score. So some of our main takeaways from the approach in Kenya are that relying on the directors of Kemfree to put pressure on county directors didn't work. Calling both extension officers and the county directors directly to motivate them also didn't really work. So what actually did work was sending detailed WhatsApp messages to both of these groups, and then creating an incentive scheme whereby the county that carries out the most assessments would get to keep water testing kits as a reward. Now that was what worked there. So what did we learn? Firstly, consistent training and follow-up are really non-negotiable. One-off workshops don't stick. We had to keep showing up, both physically and virtually, through calls and through even video calls. Secondly, the welfare thresholds in an app like this or in a framework have to be grounded in local conditions. There was often, the natural water sources had such high nitrites that there's nothing you could do really to reduce it further by doing water changes, so we had to be realistic. And then the frameworks had to be flexible as well, so that farmers could adapt without feeling judged or overwhelmed. And as I mentioned, we saw that behavioral indicators hold a lot of promise. And to me personally, one of the most encouraging aspects that I saw was that there was a shift in mindset that we started to see. We saw farmers starting to ask more questions. It's like, what do these indicators mean? What's this trade-off between higher stocking densities and water quality, and even things like fish sentience and the ethics of certain practices like slaughter methods. In many cases, it has not been something I thought of. So the next steps for our projects in both countries are to keep going with the training, given that the approach seems to be working so far. We also need to find a way of getting water testing kits into the hands of more farmers, more aquaculture practitioners, and some more extension officers. We're also looking at the possibility of bringing in certification that is specific to the farm, where the level that these farms are at, and to the farms that are more ready than others. And of course, all of these initiatives should continue to advance the One Welfare approach by improving fish welfare whilst boosting farmer livelihoods and minimizing adverse impacts on the environment. And I'll close by highlighting that our work shows that the One Welfare approach can be a key driver of the sustainable growth of the aquaculture sector. Even small interventions, such as improving water quality, can yield large welfare gains, and it really is crucial to keep fish welfare on the African aquaculture agenda, since it remains highly, highly neglected. Thank you for listening, and thank you to all of our collaborators in Egypt and in Kenya, without whom none of this work would be possible. I've listed them all at the bottom there. FAI Farms, Aquavet Egypt, the University of Kafr Sheikh in Egypt, Royal Holloway University of London, Kemfree, and of course all the farmers. Thank you.